In this video, we will focus on the Ryukyu Islands, discussing the ongoing 500-year-long war between China and Japan. Situated in the northeastern Sea of Fujian, the Ryukyu Islands lie between Taiwan Province and Japan. This geographic location makes the Ryukyu Islands a fiercely contested area between China and Japan. Why is that? Japan, surrounded by the sea on all sides, is a typical maritime nation. Its narrow landmass results in a lack of strategic depth, and the absence of abundant resources underground leads to a heavy reliance on imports. Consequently, for Japan, a maritime nation, maintaining high living standards necessitates maritime expansion. By considering the vast open sea as its hinterland, Japan could then expand onto the mainland, thus gaining strategic depth and establishing peripheral defenses, enabling access to economic resources. Japan's territorial expansion primarily focused on two directions. Firstly, in the northwest, crossing the Tsushima Strait to conquer the Korean peninsula, then northeast China, using it as a base to breach the Great Wall and enter the North China Plain. Secondly, in the southwest, using the Ryukyu Islands as a stepping stone to conquer Taiwan. With Taiwan as a base, Japan aimed to conquer coastal provinces like Fujian, Guangdong, Zhejiang, eventually reaching the Yangtze River and joining forces with the Japanese troops in North China, ultimately seizing the core heartland of China. Alternatively, proceeding south from Taiwan to conquer Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, acquiring fertile agricultural lands and natural resources like rubber. The 20th century Japanese aggression largely unfolded along these two directions. To expand its territory southwestward, Japan's initial step was to conquer the Ryukyu Islands. One could argue that the Ryukyu Islands served as the intersection between China and Japan, the necessary path for Japan's southwestward expansion and China's front line in containing Japan. However, China boasts vast territorial expanse, being a typical inland nation. Before the age of maritime exploration, external threats to China mostly emerged from the grasslands rather than the tumultuous seas. Moreover, inland nations demand strict control over both population and land. They hardly permit uncontrolled foreign elements to arise, especially when their strength allows it. Islands beyond the mainland, due to maritime barriers, are challenging to directly control. Moreover, populations on islands are prone to incline toward autonomy. In this context, throughout China's dynasties, interests in the Mongolian Plateau and Hushi Corridor far outweighed maritime concerns. Interests in Jiayu Pass and the Hatao region surpassed those in the maritime Ryukyu Islands. Different national types dictated the varying priorities between China and Japan, thus laying the groundwork for numerous historical events. Regarding the Ryukyu Islands, historical records are incredibly succinct. Since the Han and Wei dynasties, there has been no contact with China. During the Han and Wei periods, Japan was subservient to China, yet the Ryukyu Islands remained unconnected to China, indicating their desolation and insignificance to China at that time. It wasn't until the ambitious Emperor Yang of Sui dynasty, Yang Guang, aimed to expand in all directions that envoys were dispatched to discover the existence of the Ryukyu Islands. However, during the Tang, Song, and Yuan dynasties, China's overseas trade flourished. Particularly, Fujian's Chuanzhou opened three maritime trade routes. The first route sailed from Chuanzhou to Taiwan, then used Taiwan as a hub to trade with Japan and the Philippines. The second route departed from Chuanzhou, briefly stopping at Ningbo in Zhejiang before sailing northeast to trade with the Korean peninsula and Japan. The third route embarked from Chuanzhou to Guangzhou, passing through Vietnam and the Philippines to reach Sumatra in Indonesia. From there, ships crossed the Strait of Malacca into the Indian Ocean, trading in India, the Persian Gulf, and the east coast of Africa. The trade route utilizing Taiwan as a hub for trade with the Philippines and Japan inevitably had a significant impact on the Ryukyu Islands. During this interaction, they encountered China's large ships, exquisite goods, and abundant currency, which led to an admiration for China. Crucially, situated between Taiwan and Japan, the Ryukyu Islands likely played a pivotal role in Sino-Japanese trade, reaping substantial benefits. Consequently, the Ryukyu Islands were no longer isolated from China. By the early Ming dynasty, the Ryukyu Islands established genuine vassal relations with China. For China, the Ryukyu Islands were an overseas vassal state of little significance, but for Japan, they represented a lifeline crucial to national security. As the Age of Discovery commenced, Japan's involvement in global maritime trade deepened. Although the Ming dynasty abandoned official maritime expeditions, private trade along coastal regions flourished. Numerous merchants built ships, engaging in trade with Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, and selling silk, porcelain, tea, and other goods. In this backdrop, Japan was unwilling to confine itself to the four islands. It sought to venture out, securing greater strategic depth and living space. Thus, just as the Ryukyu Islands established vassal relations with China, they faced aggression from Japan. In the year 1556, Jiajing 35th year, Japan invaded the Ryukyu Islands, intending to use them as a springboard to seize Taiwan. However, upon landing, the Japanese forces were defeated by the Ryukyu Kingdom's Crown Prince Shan Yuan. Japan stayed relatively quiet for 40 years before initiating larger-scale aggressive actions. In the year 1592, Toyotomi Hideyoshi had unified Japan, marking the end of the Warring States period. He decided to dispatch a force of 300,000 to invade the Korean peninsula. The plan was to use the peninsula as a launching pad for a decisive battle against the Ming dynasty. Succeeding in this, Japan aimed to relocate its capital to Beijing. However, Emperor Wanli of the Ming dynasty led troops to Korea, commanding generals like Li Rusong in a war of resistance against Japan at great cost. The Japanese were defeated, crushing Hideyoshi's ambitions of advancing northward. Following this war, Hideyoshi grew despondent and eventually passed away. By the year 1610, Tokugawa Ieyasu became the shogun of Japan, inaugurating the Tokugawa shogunate era. Learning from Hideyoshi's failed invasion of Korea, Ieyasu chose not to directly engage in warfare with the Ming dynasty. Instead, he decided to expand southward and seize maritime fortresses. In that year, Tokugawa Ieyasu collaborated with the Satsuma clan from southwestern Japan to invade the Ryukyu Islands. This invasion resulted in Ryukyu's defeat, with King Shoenei being taken captive to Japan and coerced into signing the Treaty of Shimonoseki. This treaty marked Japan's first unequal treaty with a weaker nation as a maritime power, effectively making Ryukyu a vassal of the Satsuma clan and a colony of Japan. From then on, Ryukyu simultaneously pledged allegiance to both China and Japan. When paying tribute to Japan, they used the Japanese-era names, while honoring the Ming and Qing emperors when paying tribute to China, while secretly maintaining subservience to Japan. Entering modern times, Japan underwent the Meiji Restoration, gradually becoming East Asia's first industrialized nation. As its national power grew, Japan's ambitions swelled, leading to the initiation of aggressive wars along established routes. In the year 1872, Japan declared the Ryukyu Islands as its territory, renaming the Ryukyu Kingdom to Ryukyu Domain and appointing King Shotai as the Ryukyu Domain Lord. In 1879, Japan commanded the Ryukyu Domain Lord Shotai to relocate to Tokyo. Subsequently, Okinawa Prefecture was established in the Ryukyu Islands, with a governor appointed by Tokyo to oversee administration. This event marked the end of Ryukyu's existence as an independent kingdom, as Japan secured its southern advance positions. In 1894, the Sino-Japanese War erupted. Japan emerged victorious, thoroughly seizing the Korean peninsula, Liaodong Peninsula, and through the Treaty of Shimonoseki, Taiwan. This victory paved the way for Japan to establish a thoroughfare for territorial expansion in both northern and southern directions. Meanwhile, China was on the brink of entering its darkest historical phase. Even today, the relationship between the Ryukyu Islands, China, Japan, and the United States remains unresolved. If Taiwan is considered China's gateway to the seas, then the Ryukyu Islands serve as the gateway to Taiwan. During the Cairo Conference before World War II, President Roosevelt proposed joint administration of the Ryukyu Islands by the United States and China. However, Chiang Kai-shek, after careful consideration, abandoned the idea of reclaiming the Ryukyu Islands. After the war, the United States briefly gained administrative, judicial, and legislative powers over the Ryukyu Islands. In the early 1970s, these powers were returned to Japan, re-establishing Okinawa Prefecture. Yet, the United States retained the authority to station troops in the Ryukyu Islands. Currently, there exists the Okinawa U.S. military base hosting 20,000 soldiers from the U.S. Navy, Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps. Why does the United States station troops in the Ryukyu Islands? Fundamentally, it's because the Ryukyu Islands lie between mainland China, Taiwan province, and Japan. The U.S. military presence in the Ryukyu Islands serves to monitor Taiwan, Japan, blockade mainland China, intimidate Southeast Asian nations, and coordinate operations with the U.S. fleet. For China to truly advance towards the seas, it must reclaim Taiwan. Doing so means simultaneously countering Japan's ambitions. Even if Taiwan cannot be incorporated, the expulsion of U.S. troops stationed in the Ryukyu Islands is essential to demilitarize the region, ensuring the security of Taiwan. The ownership of the Ryukyu Islands has, in reality, been an unresolved war between China and Japan for 5 centuries. This is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. We genuinely appreciate your support.